intimidated by it.
President Trump blamed the media today for a, quote, very big part of the anger we see today in our society. Trump's comments on Twitter come after some news outlets and media personalities were quick to assume this was the result of President Trump's rhetoric about liberal Democrats.
If you look at who they've targeted so far, it's almost like they're following Donald Trump's Twitter feed.
We have a president who has talked for a couple of years now about imprisoning his political rival in Hillary Clinton, who has encouraged violence against the media.
We are in an era now where violence seems to have license by the President of the United States.
The president certainly has encouraged this kind of rhetoric.
This is what happened when the president calls you the enemy of the people.
We did not hear the president accept any bit of responsibility for something that he and his supporters do and lead.
Donald Trump too often has helped to incite some of these feelings of anger, if not violence.
Meanwhile, there are opinions being shared on social media and the internet in general that maybe this was all a hoax meant to sway voters ahead of the midterm election. The Associated Press has found that hospitals around the world are serving as makeshift prisons. First, they heal patients. Then, if they can't pay, they detain them. The practice is generally illegal, but it is astonishingly common, occurring in at least 30 countries in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. One expert calls it the dirty underbelly of global health that no one wants to talk about. Operation Rescue has found more evidence that abortions are not always safe. Charlie Butts has the story.
The pro-life organization has cited problems at 2 additional abortion facilities. First is Presidential Women's Center in West Palm Beach, in a second trimester abortion for a 31-year-old patient done by Frank Rodriguez. Cheryl Sullinger of Operation Rescue tells AFN he inserted laminaria for the first phase of the abortion.
Instead of removing all of the laminaria dilators that are meant to open the womb so that they can fit the abortion instruments inside, he had actually shoved one accidentally inside her uterus and lost it.
The abortion was completed and she was discharged with the laminaria still inside. 5 days later, she died. Insurance claims lodged against Rodriguez and clinic medical director Daniel Sachs totaled $160,000. Rodriguez only received a slap on the wrist from the medical board. The clinic has a record of sending abortion patients to hospital emergency rooms. In Chicago, AFN previously reported on women hospitalized after abortions at a downtown Planned Parenthood.
We found that 2 more women were hospitalized there, and that over the course of the last year, there have been 8 women hospitalized, primarily because of botched abortions and other complications.
So again, Operation Rescue is calling on Illinois authorities to investigate and take action. I'm Charlie Butts.
And since filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, Sears has been trying to persuade suppliers to keep shipping it merchandise by touting the $300 million in financing it has secured so that its business can continue operating through Christmas. But a growing number of manufacturers who themselves got hurt or watched others get burned by Toys R Us's quick demise are still nervous. Their reluctance to work for Sears heading into the Christmas shopping season could be a major blow to its survival, which depends on a constant flow of merchandise. Find more news at onenewsnow.com.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Probably designed to get attention. It was designed to be caught. And while it may be a device that could function, I think it was designed more than anything to strike fear in the hearts of those people who they were intended to target.
You always have the left ginning up
you know, angry, the mentally ill, storming the barricades, and Republicans are standing there with a PowerPoint demonstration trying to explain how a wall or tax cuts will be better for you and improve the lives of lots of people.
And now, Stacey Washington.
Woo! Welcome to the show. It's my pleasure to be with you. And guess what? We have a jam-packed show for you again today. So I have so much content for you. And we're going to start off with some hard truths. I'm going to share a few personal things with you. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think in this vast audience, 32 states, 800 communities, hundreds of thousands of listeners at any given moment on radio, that there's someone out there who might be going through the same thing as me. And so why not share what I'm going through so that you can learn from it and we can share together in this journey that we're doing. We're walking with God, walking in faith, learning in faith, everybody striving towards sanctification and just waiting on God to do what he can do in our lives. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. Today on the show, we have David Safavian. He's a deputy director for the American Conservative Union's Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. We're also going to be talking about the Missouri Department proposing a traditional ammo ban and what can be done about it. We do have a nice sized audience in the state of Missouri, and we want you to be armed with the information that you need, no pun intended, to be able to decide how you want to vote on that issue. And we're also going to talk about a study that shows that television in America has hit a record number of LGBTQ etc. regulars, and what that means for our viewing habits, the impact it has on our culture, and how what we watch on the screen really filters in not just into our homes, but into our psyche and what's normal in American life. And it's an intentional change that's being made. It's a cultural shift. And if you don't feel like you're on board with it, well, the option is to turn your TV off, to not buy the products that sponsor those programs, because that's the only way you can communicate with them that you don't like what they're putting out. So we'll get into that as well. Right now, the title of today's show is Don't Be Distracted by the Bomb Scare. And I'm telling you, since none of the bombs went off, to me, that story was yesterday. Yeah, some new ones were found today, but none went off. So that's not the main deal. The main deal is the migrant caravan. That is going on still to this day. That's still going on, and the numbers in that caravan are growing. And we are going to get into, later in the show, I'm going to tell you, I found some information online that connects the government of Venezuela, who's funding this, per our Vice President Mike Pence, who has all of that top secret intel and information that he can share, and how that connects up with Russia and China and election interference. And for a group of Americans, namely the activist Democrats, who are so obsessed with that, you would think they would be uncovering this for the American people so we can understand why 7,000 to 14,000 people, well-dressed with $1,000 strollers, are currently marching on America through Mexico, an ally of ours. Yeah, so we'll talk about that as well. Right now, I want to start off with the daily confession. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Our companion scriptures for that today are Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And that's Proverbs 19:21. Then the last one is Philippians 2:12 through 13. God fulfills his purpose for believers. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So why these scriptures? Why today? Well, I'm share some personal stuff with you. So because I'm on media and because I've done thousands, maybe over 4,000 interviews on radio alone, that doesn't include the TV interviews, because I'm so pointed in my commentary and I bring such a strong perspective to things, a lot of people are under the impression that I'm like some robot. I don't have any feelings. And so when there's something to be said, when there's criticism to be leveled, or if there's some rude activity that needs to be leveled at someone, people can use the fact that I'm strong in my public persona to justify that by simply, she doesn't have feelings. She's not a person who has feelings. This won't hurt her. Nothing bothers her. She doesn't have feelings. I don't have to police my behavior. I don't have to treat her with respect, or I don't have to worry about what she might feel about this because she doesn't have any feelings. Now, obviously, that's not true. I have feelings, and my feelings get hurt just like any other person. And so what I tend to do is I tend to operate in unforgiveness. When I locate the threat, I immediately want to let it out of my life. I want to excise that person or that group or that family or whoever it is. I want to cut them out of my life, and I want to do whatever I can to never have any interaction with them again. Now, that's not what God calls us. God calls us to interact with people, to forgive them repeatedly, as many times as he forgives us. And when we operate in unforgiveness, it sets up a stronghold for the enemy. So our pastor has been preaching about forgiveness, and I thought, I probably have a little unforgiveness in my life. And woo boy, I guess God was like, I heard that. I'm gonna help you understand where you are. I was operating in a lot of unforgiveness. So you know how it is when you get done with a season of self-examination and repentance, and you feel like you're finally turning the corner. That's when your first test comes. When someone who maybe you respect, someone that you maybe even look up to, someone that you kind of almost set on a pedestal, if you will then show their true selves, that they're a human being and that they're capable of making not just normal-sized errors, but huge errors. And when that happens, your old self that you've just repented and tried to turn away from will come roaring back and say, cut them out. They're dead to me. It's over. But that is not what God has for us to do. And this can be especially a difficult situation to be in if, let's say, you're praying for something at work or at home, in your personal life, whatever, and you've been praying for it for years. It's in your prayer journal 50 times. It's something that even your friends know. If they're praying for you, that's something that you have. It's top of mind for you. You want this, whatever it is. And then let's say you receive it. God is gracious and he's good to you, and he gives you this thing you've been praying for. And I'm not talking about houses or cars or anything. I'm talking about something that you feel like it's something that you're meant to do, that you want to do, and that if God would give you that, it would be an extension of what you can do for him. This is one of the desires of your heart. Well, when that happens, the first thing that's going to happen after that is you're going to see people that you probably respected or maybe even put on a pedestal begin to behave in ways that you're like, this can't be that person. That's where the Psalm 23 comes in. In verse 5, it says, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. That is the description of you receiving God's blessings and maybe things that you've prayed and fasted for over years. You receive them, and you're sitting at a table receiving God's blessings, and your enemies can see it, and they're ticked. They're triggered. They're melting. They can't handle it. And that's when they're going to launch off into attacks on you for receiving what God has for you. And that's when you have to decide if you're going to obey God and forgive them, even if they don't ask you, or if you're going to operate in unforgiveness. And so this hard lesson has prompted me to share it with you, because I'm sure there's someone out there who's in this same situation. And my encouragement for you, and the daily confession that we have, is in this scripture. God fulfills his purpose for us as believers, even if our enemies don't want him to. And what God has for you, no man can take from his hand. When God has a purpose for you and you're operating in it, resist the temptation to get into vengeance or payback or unforgiveness, because that gets in the way of you walking in what God has for you to do. That enemy can't take what God has for you, but you can get rid of it by disobeying and not forgiving. So this Bible verse, this Philippians 2:12-13 says, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now so much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God, not that Christian person you idolized. It's God, not that person that you thought was just amazing and now they're attacking you. It's not that person who is going to work in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. It's God. So we have to put our eyes back on him. And so I'll say for any person, if you're thinking about someone else, that person doesn't have feelings. That's why I can say this about them. That's why I can do this to them. That's why I can operate in this way. You're wrong. Every person has feelings, regardless of their public persona. Every person has feelings, and those feelings should matter to you if you want your feelings to matter to other people. And if you think you're hiding your negative, antagonistic, horrible feelings towards that person, you're not. They can see you a mile away, and that hurts them too. Now, you may not care. You may think you're justified, or you may have your own reasoning or designs or purposes for it, but it doesn't escape God's eyes, just like it doesn't escape the person you think you're not hurting because they don't have any feelings. And in all things, you have to understand that while you're gnashing your teeth and having an upset moment, that person, you don't know what God has for them. You don't know what God wants them to do. And it's not your place to decide. So he prepares a table in the presence of our enemies. Our cup overflows. Elsewhere in the Bible, it says that when we obey God, his blessings will run us down. They will chase us and overtake us and pass us up. In other words, the blessings will be in front of us, and we will be in the midst of that blessing through our obedience, because that's how much God loves our obedience to him. So I encourage you to continue to be obedient and to disregard individuals who are probably mistreating you because they've told themselves you don't have any feelings. Disregard that and cling to the scripture, and know that when you see that, it's a hallmark of you being seated at the table in the presence of your enemies. And sometimes those enemies can be Christians, and sometimes they can be people that you previously thought were just fantastic and you idolized them. Or maybe you thought they were someone that you could follow their example. And maybe not. But God has a purpose for your life. He has something for you to do. And you keep your eyes on that. Give your hurts and your cares and the unfairness of it all to God, and let him take over and let him fix the situation while you continue to operate in what he has for you to do, which is mighty. It's great. The work that God has for you to do is something that is important. It's integral to the kingdom. You were ordained for such a time as this. You are equipped. You are well prepared, and you go with that. You stick with what God has for you. And the last thing I'll say, the first verse, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And so, you know what, haters? You can have all the plans you want, but the Lord's purpose will prevail. And I'll say, for those who are the naysayers, nothing's been given over here. It's all been earned and prayed for and fasted for and prayed for some more. There is no giving when it comes to, well, you're just doing that because someone gave you that. No, not over here. Not only do I have feelings, but I also have earned what has been provided. And I'm confident in that, and I'll never be dissuaded from that. We all have feelings. Consider where you're behaving, and know that it's all seen. It's all seen. It's all been observed. And you've been turned over to the Lord. I say the line of haters is long. Get in the back. All right, so we are up against the break. When we return, we're going to have David Safavian, Deputy Director for the American Conservative Union's Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. He's going to join us to talk about President Trump moving towards a broad criminal sentencing reform. We're also going to touch on exactly what that entails. What is this broad sentencing reform, and should we be in favor of it, or is it just giving criminals a slap on the wrist? As Christians, we have to be concerned for those who are imprisoned, but we also have to make sure that we don't incentivize crime in this country. All right, we'll be back with more right after this.
The Ministry of Preborn meets abortion-minded women right where they are and reaches them with the love of Christ.
We showed her love, and we accept her right where she's at. If the baby's saved by what we do here, and the mother's life is spared from the devastation of abortion, that definitely helps them in this life. But this is not all that there is. We want our clients to know about Jesus.
I got to see his heartbeat. It kind of just looked like a little butterfly in a bubble. The Lord gave me that baby, and He gave me that baby for a reason.
The Ministry of Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country, helping abortion-minded mothers to choose life for their unborn babies. To find out more about how you can help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. I remember when Bill Bright, the founder of Crew, was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, a terminal disease. He wrote a letter to the staff expressing his hope and confidence in God. He knew God could heal him, but he also said that no matter what happened, he was going to rejoice because he was going to be in the very presence of God. What a marvelous perspective. No matter what we're going through, if we belong to Him, we're never without hope. Job demonstrated that kind of hope in Job chapter 19, verses 25 and 26. As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last He will take His stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God. Job expressed this in the midst of excruciating pain and suffering, and yet he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. There are three certainties we find in these verses. Number one, we have a Redeemer, and He's alive. We have one who has bought us back from the snare of the devil with His own blood and given us a hope in heaven. We have a Redeemer. Secondly, He's coming back. I don't know what's going to take place in this life, but I know that my Redeemer is going to return. He will stand on this earth. Then thirdly, we will be with Him. I don't understand anything else in life, and there are times when we can't figure out what's going to happen the next second. But we do know that we will one day be with Him. Here's what I want you to remember today. For the follower of Christ, there is no such thing as a hopeless situation. We are forever His, and He is forever ours. And we will be forever with Him.
Crawford Loritz is senior pastor of Fellowship Bible Church in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. For more information, go to livingalegacy.org. livingalegacy.org.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacy on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Perhaps you have never been to our website, stacyontheright.com. Check it out. Hit the subscribe button. Also, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram, and make sure and hit the follow button on those. Our Facebook page is Stacy on the Right, and you can also find American Family Radio's Facebook page as well as Urban Family Talks. You should hit the subscribe button on those as well. Share the show if you are streaming us online. Share the show, hit the share button so everyone will know what you're watching and that you love it. And we thank you so much for your ears, for our terrestrial listeners all over the country. So glad to have you with us today. It's Thursday. Programming note, I actually am going to be doing the MC duties tomorrow at a prayer breakfast that is gathering together. I think our attendance is up to 160 now. A prayer breakfast for pastors in the St. Louis area. And if you are in the St. Louis metro region and you're going to be there, I'd love to shake your hand at some point during the program and say hello. I love meeting just anybody who really is sharing in this journey with us, where we're walking with the Lord and we're trying to remain faithful. And this is the hard work of, putting up with people not being nice, but people being people, right? That's one of my slogans. People are going to people. So we have to know that. And also that we're the same. We inadvertently offend. We sometimes offend intentionally. We get outside of ourselves. We get ahead of ourselves. We get ahead of God, and we might be the on the other end where we're the offender. But God has a prescription for all of that, and it's so good to know that and to be just graciously received here on the radio. It's good to be with you. As we're working to get our guest, I want to get this bit of information here from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. It's the Firearms Industry Trade Association. Full disclosure, I'm a member. And one of their alerts that they sent out, it was early this morning, Missouri Department proposes traditional ammo ban, voicing your opposition by submitting comments before October 31st. So that gives you just under 2 weeks. Actually, not really. That gives you about 6 days to leave comments. The Missouri Department of Conservation recently proposed 2 regulation changes that would ban the use of traditional or lead shot for all hunting. The second proposal would ban the use of lead ammunition for dove hunting on 20 popular conservation areas. Now, this is interesting because these proposals have the potential of pricing many hunters out of doing what they love, which is hunting. So this is a way of preventing people who are law-abiding citizens from engaging in a sport that they enjoy just because the sport involves firearms, which are one of the new taboos issued into us by the left. Leftists who've never owned guns, never shot them, don't even know the difference between a magazine and a so-called clip. They're going to propose legislation to ban certain types of ammunition so that hunters have to spend a lot more money in order to do what they love. Why? Because we don't have an overabundance of deer? Come on, deer are our natural food. That's why we find them wherever we live, because they are our natural food. That's what God made them for. That's why we hunt them. That's why they're so plentiful. So please voice your opposition today by submitting comments in opposition to each of the proposed bans. The comment period will close on October 31st of 2018. I will put the link for both of these comment areas on the Facebook page as separate items so you can just click and go straight through and make your comments. And for those who feel that if, that making the comments, what impact does it have? Just look at the opposing side of the aisle. The opposing side of the aisle often spends great amounts of time making comments on these proposed rules. And the reason they do that is because the comments are open for Americans to weigh in so that these government officials can make can make decisions based on what people want. They're not elected, so they need, they need input from constituents, people who don't actually elect them. So please take the time to make a comment. It doesn't take very long, and it's really important for them to have the feedback from Americans who live in the state of Missouri who would be impacted by this proposed legislation. All right, so now it's my pleasure to welcome our guest, David Safavian. He is the Deputy Director of the American Conservative Union Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. That's a mouthful. Hey, David, thanks for joining the show today.
Hey, Stacey. Thank you for having me on. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties, but I'm so excited to be with you.
I'm glad to have you here because I'm really interested in the criminal justice reform. We've actually had some White House guests on to talk about it. We've had White House staffers on to talk about it. We've also had think tank folks on to talk about it. And the range of feelings on this proposal run the gamut. And we really greatly respect the work of the American Conservative Union Foundation, and we're so excited to hear you comment on it. So lay it out for us. What is being proposed here?
So American Conservative Union, we approach criminal justice reform in general from three different perspectives. One is that if the government's going to spend our money, they need to spend it wisely, and they need to generate results, and that includes results in the criminal justice field in our prisons. The second important part is that every human life has value, and so we believe every human life deserves some measure of human dignity. But the most important one is public safety. Any proposal that we support has to advance in public safety and make us safer in our neighborhoods and communities. We've been working with the White House and with congressional leaders to come up with a bill that accomplishes all three of those goals. And President Trump has embraced it. The Republicans and some Democrats in Congress have embraced it, and we're moving forward. The legislation is called the First Step Act.
So we've had some people come on and say that the First Step Act is actually just going to take criminals by the hand and smack their wrist ever so gently, and it will encourage more crime because violent offenders go on to violently reoffend in ever-escalating kind of turns. And so future lives will be lost, future victims of violent crime will be able to thank the First Step Act for that. What is your response to that?
So our response is that 95% of the people sitting in prison will eventually return home. When they return home, they're coming back to our neighborhoods and our communities. The real question on the table is, do we want them to come home as better people than when they went to prison? There is a mentality among some that we just lock them up and throw away the key. Well, if that's the case, then every person that commits any infraction should go away for life so that we can make our neighborhood safer. We know that that's not possible. It's not a good idea. It costs a lot. And And if we don't provide these folks in prison with the incentives to improve themselves, right, to deal with their opioid addiction, their anger management addiction, or their anger management issues, to understand right from wrong and to learn their lessons. If we don't do that, then what happens is these people come out worse than when they went in, and then they do become a public safety danger, a greater public safety danger. This approach has been tried in red states across the country, and it works. And I can give you a great example. In Texas, 12 years ago, they were facing a problem where they were going to have to build 4 more prisons. And the governor at the time was Rick Perry, who's now a member of President Trump's cabinet. And Rick Perry got Democrats and Republicans together, and he said, I'm not building 4 more prisons. Come up with a better way. So what they did was they took those people, particularly nonviolent offenders, but really across the board, and they sped their way through the system a little bit. And by doing so, you have fewer people locked up and fewer people you've got to pay for to keep them incarcerated. They then took those savings and put it into exactly the type of programs that we're working on in First Step Act, to improve them, again, from the addiction perspective and the anger perspective and the ethical and moral perspective. What did we see? Well, we saw that incarceration rates dropped, but we also saw that recidivism rates dropped. People were less prone to come out of prison and reoffend again. And those are the people that, the reoffenders are the ones that really make our neighborhoods safe. So they cut down recidivism by about 23%. So they reduced that group of people who are returning criminals. At the end of the day, though, what matters most is public safety, right? Well, Texas, after implementing this, has the same crime rate as it did in 1967. It's got a historically low crime rate. So we've made Texas neighborhoods safer. We've saved $2 billion. We've closed 8 prisons. We haven't built 4 more. We've cut down on the incarceration rate, keeping families together. Oh, and by the way, we've reduced recidivism. It's a win-win-win. And what First Step Act does is it applies the same principles that they've tested in Texas and South Carolina and Georgia and Mississippi and Utah, and they apply them to the federal government. The one thing that I would say to my friends, and, this is a family disagreement, right? Conservatives can come up on both sides of the issue. Here's the thing. Right now, today, without any changes, 43% of the people coming out of federal prison end up back in prison after 5 years. And our view at American Conservative Union is only a government program can fail 43% of the time and go unchanged. We've got to come up with a better way, and we've got the data, we've got the approach that has been proven to work, and we want to make it work for everybody, not just for people in Texas.
Okay, so thank you for that answer, because I need that to be a part of this conversation, because the concern for future individuals who might be impacted by repeat criminals, especially those who commit violent crime, it's a serious issue. And dealing drugs may not be violent initially. I mean, you're just handing someone something, they're handing you some money. But the impact of drug addiction on this country is really, it's unparalleled with the new rise in the opioid crisis. And we need to understand when we're doing something like this, obviously there'll be unintended consequences, but there will also be things that we could have foreseen had we really taken a good look. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is you now have a proven track record of success with this model. What stands between the president actually, instead of thinking of it or inching of it, actually going full bore and putting this into motion?
So we've got a couple of challenges. The biggest challenge is that there are some on both sides of the aisle who oppose First Step for a couple of reasons, and they fall into 2 primary categories. The first is it's a very small group of Republicans that really do believe in the lock them up and throw away the key mentality, that we just throw human beings away. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. There's a life sentence for dealing marijuana makes 0 sense to anybody. It doesn't make us any safer, but it costs a lot of money, and it is an affront to human dignity, and it splits families. So you've got that category. You also have, and I find it a little more troubling, but maybe I'm biased. I am part of the American Conservative Union. You have some on the left.
We like you guys, by the way. We're down with the American Conservative Union.
You have some on the left that look at this from a different perspective, from two different views. One is they hate the thought of giving Donald Trump and congressional Republicans a win. This has been a long-time issue for a bunch of us in the conservative movement, but it's also been a long-time issue for those, who we disagree with most of the time on the left. And they hate the idea that Barack Obama couldn't get any criminal justice reform or prison reform legislation through in his 8 years. And after 2 years, Donald Trump is ready to crack the code and get legislation passed. And so it is noteworthy that the people that oppose this bill the strongest are Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, because they are looking at running against Donald Trump and they want to have an issue rather than having a solution. I think that's one of the biggest differences as a general proposition between conservatives and liberals is we're less about words and we're more about results. Those folks would rather have the words and the political issue than they would to have an outcome that really does help families of all colors, of all socioeconomic classes, all across the board.
We saw that with immigration as well. I mean, totally off topic, David, but it's true. When President Trump proposed to basically eliminate the DACA issue, the Dreamer people, basically all of them legalized, 3.8 million new citizens with all the rights that the rest of us on the right had said, you can't give them vote, you don't do it. He said, I'll give you all of that. I just want wall funding. And they wouldn't do it because that's a huge issue for them as well. They need Dreamers. They need DACA recipients. Those are great issues to run on in 2020. I find it sad because what you're describing to me, David, and I'm speaking to David Safavian, he's the deputy director of the American Conservative Union's Conservative Union Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. We're speaking about criminal justice reform and the SAFE Act. These are people. So I think, I'm one of those law and order type folks myself, but I also understand that for a family member who may have a person who's incarcerated, you have a family member who's incarcerated, that person is in on a low-level drug offense, you don't see that person as someone who should have the key thrown away on them. You see that person as someone who, if they could just get out and learn some skills, they could be back in your family, be a part of your life, and be a contributing member to society. And that should trump, issues for 2020, don't you think?
Boy, I would hope so. And let me, in full disclosure, I have been a guest of a federal gated community. I've been inside, and I've seen what little programming there is. I've seen how people that make mistakes come out and they're just thrown out there. They don't change when they're in prison. They don't take up the opportunities because, quite frankly, the Bureau of Prisons is not good at providing those types of programs. And look, as conservatives, we tend to recoil at the word programs, right? It just sounds like a big government solution. But what we're really talking about is how do you get people off their opioid addiction, right? How do you get people mentally prepared so that when somebody cuts them off on the road, they don't take a violent action, right? How do you get them ready to come back to society and really be a productive member of society? If we don't do anything, all we're doing is abandoning those 1.8 million people who are in prison right now. And abandoning those people may not sound great. It kind of has that social safety net sound, and that's not my point. The point here is that if we abandon those, if we don't give them the ability to fully reintegrate into society, guess what? They become those predators again. And that's the most important thing. The First Step Act, just like the legislation in Texas and Georgia and Utah and South Carolina and others, will make our communities safer.
Thank you so much. David Safavian, Deputy Director of the ACU's Foundation Center for Criminal Justice Reform. We'll be back with more right after this.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Have you ever been jealous of someone? Maybe your coworker got the position you felt you deserved, along with the raise. Maybe your neighbor invited you over to see the new luxury car, or maybe your roommate got the newest iPad and keeps showing off all the cool apps. Here's the thing. Jealous people obsess about the object of jealousy, believing that if they get what someone else has, then they'll be fulfilled. Instead of building others up, jealousy wants to destroy them. The moment jealous thoughts run through your mind, ask God to take them away. Never let jealousy take hold. It always leaves a bitter taste in your mouth.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Hello, I'm James. I couldn't stop the drug use. I had made it up in my mind that I wouldn't see 21. Teen Challenge has given me a hope. This is a place of restoration and a place of true freedom.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Hello, AFR listeners. My name is Vladimir. I received my Operation Christmas Child shoebox during a harsh winter in Ukraine, where I grew up. My favorite item was minty dental floss. I remember thinking, wow, I guess they have interesting candy in America. I want children to experience the same unconditional love I did at the age of 9. You can get involved by visiting afr.net and clicking on the Operation Christmas Child banner today.
I'm Chad Pergram with the Speaker's Lobby. The federal deficit is spiking, up a staggering 17%. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says a boost in defense spending helped hike the deficit. Still, McConnell says he'd like to, quote, spend as little as possible. The Kentucky Republican attributed deficits to entitlement spending. That's true, as entitlements are the biggest drivers of the debt, commanding nearly 70 cents of every dollar that Washington spends. It wasn't that long ago that House Speaker Paul Ryan hounded the Obama administration about skyrocketing deficits. The Speaker warned about the cost of Obamacare. He engineered a balanced budget plan called the Path to Prosperity. Under Ryan's proposed math, when he was a key figure on the House Budget Committee, deficits would shrink. But in one of Ryan's proposals, he double-counted Obamacare. On one side of the ledger, the Wisconsin Republican repealed Obamacare. On the other side, Ryan used revenue generated by Obamacare to help curb deficits. Now President Trump wants a 5% across-the-board cut. But that just goes into the president's budget proposal. It's a non-binding wish list, which he'll send to Capitol Hill, and one that Congress never acts upon. With the Speaker's Lobby, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Kamala Harris is right in that quote you just played. Americans are not only tolerant, they're amazingly generous and charitable. But we're starting to feel like this is a con man preying on our charity. We've been quite charitable for the last several decades, taking in more refugees than the rest of the world combined. And they're not always refugees. I mean, the fact that so many, these caravans, one is hooking up with another and they're coming from all these different countries. Right. At some point, the problem isn't one specific isolated problem with one country. The problem is that all of these countries are dysfunctional. The problem is who the people are who are coming. If we overwhelm our country with even more millions of Latin Americans, eventually we just become another failed Latin American state.
That was Ann Coulter, and the points she's making there are brilliant. But it's also a matter of common sense, which seems to be in short supply in Washington, D.C. As of really this moment for the past couple of decades as it pertains to immigration policy. And people on both sides of the aisle are responsible for this debacle. Anytime there's a caravan of people, whether it's 600 people or 1,000 people, we have to be concerned about that. Now, I want to get to some information. I'm gonna have to give it to you in chunks because it's a huge piece, but I want to lay out for you a bit of a alternative reasoning behind this. Now, I'm on the record as saying I think the Democrats are involved, and this is some ploy for the midterms to kind of midterm surprise. You have this caravan marching in America, and it might motivate Latin Americans who are American citizens to vote for the Democrats, and that's a plausible theory. It's been raised by many others, so it's not unique to me. But there's also another possibility, and I found this morning, and I thought to myself, wait. So first of all, we'll have some audio for you later of Vice President Mike Pence saying that the funding for the people who are in the caravan, they're funded. They were enticed to join the caravan by cash payments. It comes from Venezuela. So you might think, Okay. Venezuela, well, what's up with that? Well, I'll just give you a little teaser here. You've got financed by Venezuela, but prompted by a partnership between Venezuela, China, and Russia, and all of them being upset by trade moves made by the President of the United States. So this is an election interference tool brought to you by those three nation states operating in concert because they're upset with Donald Trump. Remember, his primary campaign issue and the issue he's governing on is immigration. So President Trump and Secretary Mnuchin sanctioned Venezuela and cut off their access to expanded state oil revenue. Venezuela needs more money. China and Russia are already leveraged to the gills in Venezuela and hold 49% of Citgo as collateral for loans outstanding. China and Russia now need to loan more directly. However, China cannot engage in economic interference with Venezuela, or they risk losing access to the U.S. banking system. Therefore, all current Chinese aid to Maduro comes in the form of IOUs. These ongoing loans are likely impossible to be repaid. So we're going to take just one quick step away from this for a second and go to the phones. We have Ed in Tennessee. Ed, thank you for calling the show today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking my phone call.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that I do listen to you all the time, and you do a great job, Stacey.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just wanted to comment about that gentleman about the prison reform.
Yes, yes.
That right there is so desperately needed. The reason why I'm saying is because about 30 years ago, I served time in prison myself in Missouri. And when I got out, all they pretty much gave me was some money that was left in my account, a pair of clothes that on my back, and a change of clothes, bus ticket to send me to the town I was going to go to the halfway house in, and says, good luck, and sent me on my way.
Wow.
They didn't hardly do anything else. And when when I was in man's programs that they had and all that, I pretty much kept myself busy in schooling and working while I was in, okay? Yes, they had a pre-release program to prepare, but preparing doesn't go far enough. Okay.
So do you agree with what he was proposing? Because I thought he really laid it out kind of. He had a lot of detail there on what they're hoping to do. Do you think it will help?
Yes, it will help. But what needs to be most of, because I'm just going by experience myself, Stacey. Okay. It wasn't until I got out and I started really getting myself really plugged in to God's Word and letting God's Word change me from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
What really needs to go on in prisons today is getting a program in there that will allow the inmates to really get into the Word and let that Word change them from the inside out. Because if they get changed by God's Word, they're going to come out a totally different person than when they went in. And I'll guarantee you, when they come out, they know they can be a better person than people that have never been in. And yes, it is very close to my heart about this because I'm living proof of it. And if it wasn't for God's Word getting in me and changing me, I would have been back in.
Wow.
I was determined to stay out. But God finally got a hold of me and got me straightened out. And I finally submitted myself to the Lord. And you know what? Today, I've been through Bible school. I'm an ordained minister now.
Wow.
And I'm turning around and I'm speaking to people, going through those situations, speaking to them about God's Word.
Mm.
And On top of that, I tore up my first family. I helped tear it up. But God helped me with that by giving me another family. This is my third marriage, and thankfully God has changed me and replaced what Satan stole from me. He has replaced.
Wow. And he says that. The Bible says that he will restore what the locusts have eaten. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Ed, for calling and for sharing your personal testimony. And I think one of the best endorsements for any policy is when someone like yourself who's been through this comes along and says, we need it, but we need even more. I wish we could be where we were 20 years ago, where a faith-based initiative would not be immediately separation of church and state, because you're so right, Ed, about the need for our prison inmates to have the opportunity to know God. And they're so desperate for it. But it seems as if the way our culture is moving, the only time you can get to God is in prison, and now they're even clamping down on that. Ed, thank you for calling the show today and for your kindness about the show. Thank you. I really appreciate that. You could hear the emotion in his voice. We need this so badly. And I'm very law and order. You know, if you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you've heard me, drop the hammer on any number of issues where I feel like people are breaking the law or they're flouting the law or our legislators are not enforcing the law, and it's wrong. But we also have that these are real people. I go back to what I said in the first segment, which, by the way, there was a question. So in forgiving someone, if that person's abusing you, forgiving them sets you free, but it doesn't mean you have to continue to be in relationship with them. And when I was talking about cutting people out of my life, I'm just talking, these people haven't abused me per se, but they have deeply offended me or hurt me, and I want to cut them out. And that is not, that I've been told God doesn't want me to do that. So that's what I meant. There's a clear delineation. When there's abuse or repetitive bad behavior and no acknowledgement on the other person's part, forgiveness sets you free, but it does not mean you have to still be in relationship. So please don't take those two things to be the same. But I have to say, I hadn't any idea that the interview with David Safavian would bring about a call like Ed's. But if there's anything we know, it's that some of the problems we're seeing are because of the government. Some of them are because we've had a knee-jerk reaction to an increase in violent crime. But the data that David shared about the recidivism rates going down and them closing all of those prisons and the lowering of the prison population in Texas, which Texas is a huge state, huge driver of our national economy, and it's a wonderful experimentation point for almost anything you might be wanting to do. And this is as the founders intended. One state takes the step of trying out something new, and in that state, that becomes the program that those citizens are willing to get behind. And then after some years, you can see the results, which can then be spread out across the country. And if you think about how many people are incarcerated for something minor, a low-level offense, but they're spending 20 years in prison, those are wasted lives. And these are Americans who could be contributing on the outside, but they need help, like like Ed from Tennessee just shared. They need help in order to become those contributing members of society. So it's such a blessing to hear from him. And I just, I'm so grateful for a call like that today to kind of bookend what we had with the deputy director from ACU, David Safavian. So I want to kind of keep going with this information about the migrant horde. And I know we're moving through some topics pretty quickly today, but I want to get everything in because today's Thursday, so I'll just have Friday to get the last bit of information for the weekend, and then we're in the weekend where we are coasting wild and free without political stuff, and we're preparing our homes and disconnecting from social media and going to church on Saturday or Sunday, whatever your thing is, so that we can be well rested and prepared for next week. So we want to be all things in good order. I have to say, I was really surprised by this, going back to the kind of impetus. These are all the steps, according to this writer over at Sundance. You guys know Sundance over at the Conservative Treehouse. These are all the steps that led up to this migrant caravan financed by Venezuela. Now remember, China owns 49% of Venezuela's state-run PDVSA energy production. It's a collateral system where Beijing takes oil as payment for prior loans the Maduro regime cannot pay back. With the crippling Treasury Department sanctions President Trump put on Venezuela last year, Trump has actually financially punched Maduro and Jinping hard. So now you've got Mike Pence on national television pointing the finger directly at Venezuela. And if you think about it, Sundance's assertion here makes utter and complete sense. We might have given the Democrats a little bit too much credit here. So here's how he says this thing goes down. I told you, first of all, about the sanctions on Venezuela that cut off their access to expanded state-owned oil revenue. Then, according to Sundance, number 2 is China's geopolitical ally, Russia, already being squeezed with losses in energy revenue because of Trump's approach towards oil, LNG, which is natural gas, and coal. So Trump, through allies including Saudi Arabia, the European Union, France, North Africa Energy, and our own domestic production, Trump has had a huge influence on global energy prices. It's as if he came into the room like a strong man and put a stranglehold on the energy and basically said, while he's strangling it and holding it to his domination, I'm going to move these pieces around to benefit the United States and to hurt our adversaries. Now, allies in some areas, but remember, when we're talking geopolitics, we can be best friends on one issue, but on other issues, we're tooth and nail, we're tooth and dagger, we're against each other. So, additionally, President Trump is demanding that NATO countries, specifically Germany, stop supporting financial dependence on Russia. You remember that. He was at that breakfast and he said, why would Germany give their natural gas business to Russia when we are your closer ally and partner and we have natural gas that we would have sold to you and we wouldn't have put strings on it that are not beneficial to the people of Germany? Y'all remember that? And the media focused on the fact that they were supposed to be having a friendly photo op and Trump was talking business. But those of us who have half a brain or even, 2 or 3 synapses firing instead of billions, all the rest of us were like, thank you so much, golf clap. Thank you, President Trump. Don't photo op. You can have that any day. Look online for photo ops between previous presidents and these guys, and that'll satisfy your need for photo ops. If you're going to sit there and talk, why don't y'all talk business? That's what Donald Trump was there to do. So meanwhile, and directly connected, Russia is bleeding out financially in Syria. Remember, the largest military operator in Syria right now is Russia. They also have the largest number of independent operators, mercenaries, which General Mattis has been mowing down and killing like he's operating in the wrath of God. He has been mercilessly killing these mercenaries. So, have I teased you enough? Well, there's more. If you're saying goodbye to us right now, I say God bless you from the heartland. Forgiving is hard, but we all have to do it. Join with me in being poor in spirit, but rich in God's mercy and offering forgiveness to our enemies. And God bless you and have a great evening. If you're sticking around, onenewsnow.com news and information is coming at you right after this music. God bless.
It was a time when men rebuilt the ruins. With one hand they laid bricks, with the other they held a weapon. Nehemiah said, "Let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach." Our nation, after many years of decline, is in a state of moral destruction. The cry is going out.
Do you see the distress we're in?
Join us in the battle. To learn more about our mission, visit urbanfamilytalk.com.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Chris Woodward. A plan is forming to send U.S. troops to the border as the migrant caravan from Central America marches north. Fox's Jessica Rosenthal reports.
President Trump had threatened to send troops to the border, and now the Pentagon is, according to a senior defense official, drawing up plans to send as many as 800 troops in response to an urgent request from Homeland Security. The migrants are continuing north through Mexico. Some are not exactly sure how they will claim asylum once they arrive.
We come from a country where there's a lot of violence, and we want a safe place for our children.
Stories will have to be more specific than that.
Yes, very scared. Because such a big walk in vain? Yes, I'm scared.
The troops will reportedly be a combination of reserve and active duty engineers and medical personnel. They are in support of Border Patrol. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
President Trump is announcing a new plan to lower the cost of prescription drugs.
Under our new plan, the Department of Health and Human Services would allow Medicare to determine the price it pays for certain drugs based on the cheaper prices paid by other nations.
Under the current system, Americans frequently pay more for prescriptions than people do in other countries. The Department of Health and Human Services estimates overall savings to patients and programs like Medicare of around $17 billion over 5 years. But drug makers are likely to push back, arguing it's similar to imposing price controls. It's been a year since the Me Too movement swept the country, creating a greater awareness of sexual violence. AFN's Bill Bumpus reports that 1 year later, the movement has had an impact on the church as well.
A recent study by Lifeway Research found that 85% of Protestant pastors surveyed have heard of the Me Too movement. Of those pastors, 41% are now more inclined to preach about domestic and sexual violence, and 40% say they understand more about what's happening concerning that issue. And what about within the church body? Lifeway Research Executive Director Scott McConnell.
Almost 6 out of 10 pastors say that their congregation's more aware of how common sexual and domestic violence is, and more than 6 out of 10 say that their congregation has more empathy toward those who've experienced sexual and domestic violence than they did before the Me Too movement.
McConnell tells AFN many pastors have taken the small but important first step of removing the taboo of talking about such sins and crimes from the pulpit.
It's important to speak up, to make sure that victims know that there is help available and that the church cares for them. And, it's important for those that, may be committing these acts to know that it's not acceptable and that they need to get help.
McConnell says the difficult conversations that have been taking place in the culture have allowed the church to respond in healthy ways to communicate that it takes harassment and abuse seriously. I'm Bill Bumpus.
What could have been a tragic story has become something miraculous. A Minnesota man has awakened from a coma in time to see his son born. The drama started last week when Ashley Gott awoke to hear her husband Andrew gasping for air at their home. She called 911 and the dispatcher talked her through CPR until paramedics arrived. When they got to the hospital, Andrew was placed in a coma to minimize possible brain damage. While doctors told Ashley it was unclear if her husband would pull through, she told him she would not have their baby until he woke up. He did days later with his brain function intact. While doctors could not wheel his bed into the operating room for his wife's C-section, Andrew was able to watch the birth on a phone his sister-in-law carried in. We wish them well. In final news this hour, strong results from major companies, including Microsoft, Visa, and Comcast, sent stocks higher on Wall Street today. In the last half hour, the Dow was up more than 500 points, the Nasdaq 247 points, and the S&P 64 points. That doesn't recoup everything lost this week, but hey, it wasn't down. For more news and information, visit onenewsnow.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and the One News Now mobile app for Apple and Android devices. Thanks for listening.
Nothing can get done in the United States Senate for good unless we end the legislative filibuster. We're urging you today to call your senator and ask them to end the legislative filibuster so that we can defund Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in America. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121, or go to afaaction.net.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
probably designed to get attention. It was designed to be caught. And while it may be a device that could function, I think it was designed more than anything to strike fear in the hearts of those people who they were intended to target.
You always have the left ginning up, you know, angry, the mentally ill, storming the barricades, and Republicans are standing there with a PowerPoint demonstration trying to explain how a wall or tax cuts will be better for you and improve the lives of lots of people.
And now, Stacey Washington.
Oh, welcome back to the show. I'm so glad to be with you today. I'm happy to be behind the microphone yet another day. God is good. So what are we going to talk about this hour? Well, we've got this study. TV hits record percentage of LGBTQ regular characters. And if you're like me with a permanent tan, this is kind of annoying because Hollywood has always been really, really like garbage about having characters that reflect America. So instead of just having someone come in as comedic relief or someone as a sidekick who has no real story of their own, they're just there to supplement the main character, which is usually the role that black characters have. Instead of them advancing out and putting even more representation out there in addition to black characters, but also, you know, other characters of color, more women, more children, more Christians. Christians are absolutely not represented at all on media. And especially not in a positive way. Instead of doing that, they're trying to convince us, like, if aliens were real and they landed on planet Earth, they would think that over 50% of the population of this country were LGBTQ IABC. I just add the extra letters on because it doesn't mean anything like the first ones don't. So that's what they think. It's crazy. So we got that going on. We'll talk about that. We've been talking about this whole caravan. And if you'll notice, one thing that has been a side consequence, makes you say, of this story about the bombs, all of which were functioning, but none of them actually went off. Thank God, but none of them worked. Quite the bomb maker, this person. Also, they had trouble with mailing things, but, let's just stick to the main meat of the story. Is that now Anderson Cooper of CNN has announced that he will no longer show video on his program of the coming migrant invasion because it's not an invasion. They're good people. Lawbreakers for sure, but they're good people. They're good people. So we'll have audio of one of the caravan members saying, yeah, there are criminals in here. I mean, the joys of the internet and everybody having a camera and a phone. So I want to listen to Vice President Mike Pence revealing where the Central American horde is actually being funded from. And then also we'll get back to Sundance's analysis of the progression that led to Russia and China joining together to strike back at Donald Trump indirectly through Venezuela with this migrant invasion so close to the midterm election. So it's number 4.
What the president of Honduras told me was organized by leftist groups in Honduras, financed by Venezuela, and sent north to challenge our sovereignty and challenge our border. And now it's grown. The president had me reach out to President Hernandez in Honduras, to President Morales in Guatemala. We've been working very closely with Mexico. We're going to do everything in our power to prevent this caravan from coming north and violating our border. But ultimately, it is an issue in this election because what human traffickers are doing, what criminal gang members are doing in this instance, and frankly, in literally every day of the week, where they take cash to bring people up the peninsula in the hopes of them either making a claim for asylum or simply crossing our border illegally to be apprehended, is they're taking advantage of not only our porous border, but loopholes in our laws.
So do you hear that? You've got human trafficking going on, and we've talked about that extensively on this program. And I never cease to be horrified by what you hear. If you care to know what human trafficking really is, if you care to know how women are abused all the way up, we're talking about weeks and weeks of sexual abuse that these women and girls endure. to make the journey to come to America, and they're being lured here by loopholes in our laws and Democrats who are actually advertising. Did you know that CNN does a special? It's a half-hour special that airs on Univision, but it also airs on Spanish language channels in South America. It teaches people how to circumvent the U.S. immigration system. Did you know that? So you probably don't know that because you might not be fluent in Spanish, and you might not have any reason to, maybe check Univision. You might not have any reason to check and find out what kind of television programming is going on in South America. I know I don't. I barely know what's on TV here in the United States because it's so much of it is just unadulterated garbage. But that's what they do. Who made the documentary? CNN. What'd they make it for? To increase illegal immigration. Why? Because they're lawless. That's why. That's why they came out swinging against Donald Trump, because that's how you know these bombs are just a plant. There's nothing real to it. Because what have they now? A perfect set of talking points that they clearly had prepared for this occasion. Donald Trump incited people to send us bombs. Now, I don't know about you, but when exactly did we hear that Donald Trump, because remember, he's also Hitler, told people to send bombs to Democrats? All I've heard him say is vote out the lawlessness. All I've heard him say is that he wants to cut more tax, for the middle class. I've heard him say he wants to seal the border. I've heard him say, look abroad, look at the relationship that we have now in the Korean Peninsula. That's because of Donald Trump's expertise at manipulating the cards that are before him. And it's a God-given gift. God gets all the glory. I'm definitely not a Trump worshiper. I had someone say one time on Twitter, someone said, oh, you got to follow Stacey on the right. And the person looked at my TL and said, oh, she's too Trumpian. She likes Donald Trump too much. And I thought, yeah, you missed the 30-second promo or 60-second promo that Urban Family Talk made about me disagreeing with Donald Trump on whether or not it's okay to salute the flag. Y'all know me. I got a flag on the wall behind me. I'm the flag wavingest, most patriotic, chick you're going to meet this side of the Mississippi. But I did say that I disagreed with the president. Now, for someone who's 100% Trumpian, a Trump worshiper, I guess I don't know what was happening then. And I've said other things that have not been as complimentary. And, it's not about worshiping him or even agreeing with him 100%. It's about telling the truth. Which is, that's a primary reason why we're here. So anyway, back to Sundance's rundown. So we've already gone over the first two items, which were the president issued sanctions. And the sanctions that he issued were an indirect blow to Russia and China, utilizing Venezuela, but Venezuela deserved it. So, it was good all the way around. You got the Russia, who's already squeezed with losses because of their approach to oil, striking back, and they're all directly connected. You've got Russia bleeding out in financially in Syria. They're spending a lot of money there trying to look big and bad and support their ally in Syria, which, by the way, if you haven't gotten the book Ship of Fools, you can't buy it in any retail locations because it's now a bestseller. It's by Tucker Carlson. I've been listening to it on Audible, and I found copies that you can order hardbacks on hardcovers on Amazon. I ordered my paper copy. This is a book for the ages. I'm listening to it. I'm only, I think, on chapter 4, and I've learned more about the background and inner workings of the kind of people who make policy in this country who aren't elected, like Bill Kristol and Max Boot. Learned so much about them, but I got to tell you, because both of our parties are in a pro-war footing and have been since Bill Clinton, we do have a lot of nation building going on, and a lot of the unnecessary competition we see in the Middle East, namely Russia being in Syria, was precipitated by Barack Obama trying to prove that Democrats aren't weak on war and are strong when it comes to international relations and are willing to start a war with anybody. His unnecessary actions in Syria have precipitated the complete degradation of that area and the need for us to receive so many Syrian refugees in this country. Oh, that's a whole nother show. A whole nother show. But if you want to know for yourself, because I can't do, a whole book worth of content in any space of time here on the program, get the book on Audible and listen to it. Tucker Carlson reads it. It's amazing. Very informative. So the third squeeze, as Sundance puts it, is that back in 2017, Trump and Secretary Tillerson, now Secretary Pompeo, put Pakistan on notice that they needed to get involved in bringing their enabled tribal extremists, the Taliban, to the table in Afghanistan. Pakistan's primary investor and economic partner is China. The U.S. removed $900 million in financial support to pressure Pakistan towards a political solution in Afghanistan. So China has to fill a void. Of note, last month, the World Bank began discussions about a financial bailout for Pakistan. Again, more one-way bleeding of finances for China. Who did it? Donald Trump. Squeeze number 4 is China's primary economic threat of competition is next door in India. Remember, India has an extremely large population like China. So President Trump embraced this idea as leverage. He embraced India as leverage over China in trade and pledged ongoing favorable trade deals. So how do you hurt someone who's hurting you by stealing your economic prowess through the kind of one-sided, lopsided deals that the Chinese government does with our creators here, our manufacturers, our business owners? How do you strike back against the intellectual property that's being stolen, or the fact that China has operatives in Silicon Valley stealing? They're literally stealing the ideas of our greatest innovators in the technology space by giving them venture capital dollars that if you receive the money, you have to give the intellectual property over to the Chinese government so they can recreate your product and build the same kind of lab you're building in California. They can build it in China. How do you strike back against that? Well, Donald Trump is sucking back money that we've been giving that's been helping China and making them fill the void. So then he's been dealing with their direct competitors to bring forward this idea that China's not the only game in town. You're not the only place we can put a factory. You're not the only mega economy that we can deal with. Pakistan could be just as good for us. And so that's what they're doing. Notice I'm not calling it Pakistan. I'm not an Asila liberal. That's why. So you got this over here, which is MFN. It's the key play here. MFN stands for Most Favored Nation Trade Status. Donald Trump has put it on the table, as no other president has done, that he could flip Most Favored Nation status from China to India. That's a big play. It would have huge ramifications, and it would leave no room for China to continue to operate with us and dirty deal with us. If they wanted to play in our sandbox, they would have to come in clean and stop bullying our business owners. I'm just saying, for those who think Donald Trump isn't doing anything, this is a whole lot more than we saw Obama do on these issues. He didn't address any of them. President Trump launched a USTR Section 301 trade investigation into China's theft of intellectual property. This encompasses every U.S. entity that does manufacturing business with China, particularly aeronautics and technology. It also reaches into the financial sector. This is U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer completing a Section 301 review of China's trade practices back in March of 2018. And Sundance provides the links to the actual Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974, which authorizes the president to take any and all appropriate action, including retaliation, to obtain the removal of any act, policy, practice of a foreign government that violates an international trade agreement or is unjustified, unreasonable, or discriminatory, or that burdens or restricts U.S. commerce. We already have laws that say America first. All Donald Trump is saying, implement that, enforce that, back that up. That's already U.S. law. I don't need the Supreme Court to help me codify anything new. We'll use the laws already on the books that say America first. It's not a new idea. It's not original to Donald Trump. It's a foundational principle of this country, and all he's doing is operating within it. So then you have President Trump shelving the 301 action as talks progressed with China. So carrot or stick? He used the stick of Section 301. China came to the table. He put it off to the side. He can still use it. So when the U.S. and China negotiations provided no progress, the 301 review of China was pulled back off the shelf, and President Trump began to assemble his trade war strategy. The 301 tariffs and sanctions are currently being worked out with Lighthizer. I'll be back with more of this. You stay right there.
Are you still stuck on the healthcare roller coaster? Still paying those high premiums? And strapped into huge deductibles? Not knowing what's around the next turn? Well, then let me tell you about a sound, sensible healthcare choice that really is affordable. It's MediShare, the healthcare sharing solution people like you have been trusting in for more than 25 years. MediShare members report saving around $500 a month on their healthcare costs, and they never pay for things they don't believe in. Time to say goodbye to that healthcare roller coaster and say hello to MediShare.
Call ** 345 to find out how much you can save on your healthcare. MediShare. Call ** 345. Message and data rates may apply. That's ** 345.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Anna Ayers is an LGBT student at Ohio University who serves in the Student Senate. She reported receiving hateful notes, including one that threatened her life. The Student Senate president assumed that at least one of the notes must have been written by someone in the Senate who would know which desk belonged to Ayers. Because of the turmoil, the Student Senate postponed all scheduled events. Instead, the students listened to Ayers speak and express her anger, frustration, and disappointment. She called the person who did that weak, cowardly, and worthless. Also, the university changed the locks on the Student Senate doors and established new office hours. Now, before you get too angry about what happened to Ayers, you might need to know that she was arrested for making false claims. The Ohio University Police Department found that she placed the messages in the Student Senate office, along with one in her residence, by herself prior to reporting them. Sadly, these false threats are becoming all too common on college campuses. Just a few months ago, my commentary was on the rash of fake hate crimes. There are websites dedicated to document these fake crimes. Many of them are perpetuated by black activists in order to convince us that racism is alive and well on campus. Others are done by Muslims, perhaps to gain sympathy for their religion or to promote the idea that Islamophobia can be found in America's universities. This latest fake story perhaps was done to promote the LGBT agenda or merely to draw attention to her sexual orientation. I applaud the school for arresting her and for the university to follow up with a story explaining that these were false claims. We need some deterrent in order to prevent future hoaxes like this. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Opens October 26th. IndivisibleMovie.com.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
This is why we wanted a wall, Lou. We have to keep hoping this president and someday the next president. Another caravan coming. We're going to have to keep going through this every 2 months for the rest of our lives. And as President Bush said about the terrorists, we have to be right every time. They only need to be right once. This is why the chant that got Donald Trump elected was build the wall. This is exactly why we wanted a wall. We don't want to have to wait on, making sure General Kelly and Jared Kushner don't get into Donald Trump before his voters do.
Whoa. More classic Ann Coulter. This is why we love her on Stacy on the Right. So glad to be back with you. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm going to give a quick shout out to a friend who had me over for coffee today. And as our chat ran along, she broke out some chicken marsala. And I had chicken marsala and broccoli for lunch today at the home of a friend, which honestly, her house it's literally HGTV personified. And I was sitting there just basking in the beauty and eating the chicken marsala and thinking, this is just too good for me. And God is so good that I was able to have that lunch and that it was today and that we scheduled it a week ago. And I didn't know I was going to be so poor in spirit and get a chance to spend an hour and a half with her and just be uplifted by her friendship and her beautiful cooking and her beautiful home and the yummy coffee. I'm still there and just so grateful. And as Judge Brett Kavanaugh said back before he was Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, he said, cherish your friends, love your friends. Thank your friends, honor your friends. So it's wonderful to have friendship. The Bible says to have friends, you have to be a friend. And I certainly felt that today from her. So wonderful to be back. We just heard from Ann Coulter. I want to quickly get this second half of the audio from Vice President Pence describing the brutality of the caravan and the human trafficking that's going on. And then after we listen to that, I'll finish up. We just have a little bit more that leads us and helps us understand what's really going on behind the scenes, the inner workings of what's happening with the Trump administration. And this is all the stuff that goes unreported in the news that has driven these 3 nation states to send this faux caravan, this invasion force towards us next to the midterm election. So it's number 5.
Our catch and release program, are all used and exploited by human traffickers who have no regard for human life. You know, when I spoke to the president of Guatemala, he told me how at that point they were already beginning to bus some people back to Honduras, elderly, vulnerable children who'd simply been left by the side of the road by the organizers of this caravan. I mean, the truth of the matter is far beyond this caravan, nearly 40% of young girls that make their way into our country at the hands of human traffickers are sexually abused. We determine they've been sexually abused on their way north. It is unconscionable for us to continue to allow this to occur, but the way we can end it, as the president's made clear, is to have a Congress that is willing to not only fund a wall, secure our border, but to close the loopholes that human traffickers and violent gang members use to entice people to make the long and dangerous journey up the peninsula. We really do believe that we've got a crisis at our southern border, but the only way we're going to deal with that crisis in the long term is by bringing about changes in the law.
So, you know, it strains credulity that we are sitting here in America in this technological age talking about women and girls being sexually abused for weeks on end as they journey to come into this country illegally, and that the only thing we can do about it is talk about it on the radio. That the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, the Chief Executive of this country, cannot simply close the border or do anything with immigration without 25 lawsuits from liberals going straight to the Ninth Circuit Court, that he cannot do anything to protect these young women and girls, that he can't do anything to seal the border, that he can't do anything to make a dent in the $135 billion a year we spend on illegal immigrants, that we can't do anything about it in 2018. You know, talking cars, singing washers and dryers, beeping dishwashers, timers on everything. They even have a camera you can put outside your front door, and if somebody shows up at your house and tries to TP it, you can talk to them through your cell phone while you're on the other side of the planet and scare them off your property, and call 911 with one touch of the button through an app. We can do all of that, but we can't stop sex trafficking? I know you know the answer to that is that that is not true. We can stop it. But the political forces arrayed against the president from the left and the right are what's preventing that. The political forces that are arrayed against the president from the left and the right are what are preventing us from protecting thousands of women and girls from being sexually abused for weeks on end and then sold into sexual slavery once they arrive here. It is people more interested in cheap labor and everybody in the suburbs and the lefty zones having their own personal Rita, or, the gardeners, the person who vacuums your carpet while you're out at, yoga class or doing your bar class. This is why you see so much resistance from upper middle class women to Donald Trump's immigration strategy. It's not because they actually care about these people. It's because they have these people in their homes as servants. And let's be real here. I'm a mom with 3 kids. We have a pretty decent sized home. We don't have anybody helping us clean it up. So it's me and the kids. And the kids are, sporadic helpers. You know how kids can be. We have fantastic kids, but let's face it, kids don't just jump up in the morning and say, what can we clean today? Now, could we afford to have a cleaning team come in and do the work? Yeah, but if you're a little bit of a self-control person, like a control freak like myself, you don't want strangers coming in, even if you get to know them, to clean your house. So we do it ourselves. But for every family like ours, there are 100 families in the same income bracket who have someone who is an illegal immigrant coming in and cleaning and watching the kids while they're at yoga and doing, landscaping and all of that. Now, we have help on the outside, but they're not illegal immigrants, at least. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're not. But these people know the people who are working for them are illegal immigrants. And the reason they don't want the stop of cheap labor is because it's fun to have your whole day to yourself. Never mind the fact that if you have that much staff at home and they're cooking for you and they're taking care of the kids and they're picking them up here and dropping them off there, you're not really you're not a stay-at-home mom. These people are your surrogate parents. But, that, again, a whole nother show. But when you know that, you then understand that this isn't about caring about people, or they just want them here so they can use them. These people who are the women and girls are used and abused like tools all the way up here. Personally and emotionally damaged all the way up here. Then they go into these suburban homes and they're used again, paid very little. They're on social welfare. They go to the emergency room for all of their health care. They don't have health care. And their boss is some well-to-do socialite who really can't afford to have personal servants at the house, but she can if they're illegal immigrants. And if that's you and you're listening to the show, God bless you. Bless your heart. But I ain't taking anything back, so don't even email me, okay? Whatever you're thinking right now, keep it to yourself. I'm talking about you. So if you have someone there who is in your house and doing all these services and they are an American citizen, then more power to you, good for you, because if they're an American citizen, they're making you pay them a decent wage. You're paying them minimum wage at least. You have to make sure that you're filing taxes on their employee and all of that stuff. But if you have staff in your house and they're under the table, you ain't really upper middle class, are you? Because you can't afford American labor. You have to import your labor cheap and use humans like slaves. That's what you're doing. So before I get out too far off on a tangent, I want to give you the last couple things here that prompted this caravan to be put together by Venezuela and why they did it. So we were talking about Section 301 and the U.S. Trade Act, and you've got the 301 review of China. It gets pulled off the shelf and implemented. Then China comes to the table, but after months of no progress, they put it back on the shelf. Months of no progress in negotiations. They pull it back off and implement it again. And the 301 tariffs and sanctions are currently being worked out with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. So then you have President Trump, Secretary Ross, Secretary McNuchin, and USTR Lighthizer dissolving NAFTA in favor of the USMCA. Now, one of the primary objectives of Team USA was to close third-party loopholes, including dumping and origination, that China uses to gain backdoor access into the U.S. market. Now, you're thinking to yourself, geez, like when I read this, I was thinking, and you have to be thinking the same thing. If you're listening to this, or if you're following this, you're like, what? Yes, Donald Trump is thoroughly and unrelentingly putting the screws to China to force them to stop being a bad actor in the U.S. economy. So, of course, they're hopping mad. Of course, they're going to join together with Russia and fund a invasion of migrants coming from south of our border. Why wouldn't they? They've got to do something because he's got, I mentioned earlier, a stranglehold. This is more like one of those chokeholds, I forget what it's called, where the person chokes the person and it doesn't kill them, but a sleeper hold, is that what it's called, where it just knocks them out? He's got them in like sleeper holds, choke holds, and all kinds of other wrestling terms I'm not qualified to bandy about. He's got them, they got nowhere to run. So one of I mentioned the dumping and origination. China uses it to avoid trade and tariff restrictions. Now, China is a non-market country without a free trade agreement. We do not have a free trade agreement with them. So they send their parts to Mexico and Canada for assembly and then backdoor the entry of those parts into the United States via NAFTA, which is why the president said on the campaign trail and after he gained the presidency that he had to eliminate NAFTA. And you can get all of this information to share with friends at theconservativetreehouse.com. So here is the final bit of this. I'm going to run through it really quickly. And we will open up for calls. You know, you might just be reeling from the information, but obviously I'd love to hear your input on it. We've got the call lines open at 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. Squeeze number 7 is that President Trump has been open, visible, and vocal about his intention to shift to bilateral trade renegotiation with China and Southeast Asia immediately after Team USA concluded with NAFTA. Now, remember, current negotiations with Japan are ongoing. Then, President Trump positioned the U.S. relationship with the European Union as a massive potential loss for Europe via steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs. Remember when everybody was screaming and bucking in the streets, and they're like, oh my gosh, he's doing tariffs with the second Great Depression. Not so. That's why I wasn't scared, because I figured a businessman like that must know something we don't know, and here it is. If they did not, President Trump would shift their trade relationship towards greater reciprocity, reconsider the size of their trade relationship with China, and after initially trying to push back, Europe gave in. So the tariffs worked. I repeat, the tariffs worked. They are now shifting their trade relationship with us towards greater reciprocity and reconsidering the size of their trade relationship with China, another gut punch to China to get them to stop raking our businesses over the coals and stealing our intellectual property. So then the next step for President Trump was that he positioned the Association of Southeast Asian Nations as trade benefactors for assistance with North Korea. Last year, South Korea and U.S. trade deal, KORUS, was renegotiated and announced in March. The relationship between ASEAN nations and the Trump administration is very strong and getting stronger, which leads to President Trump forming an economic and national security alliance with Shinzo Abe of Japan. Remember those meetings? He came to the United States, but instead of taking him to the White House, President Trump and Mrs. Trump, the First Lady, met Shinzo Abe and his beautiful wife at Mar-a-Lago. They golfed, they wined, they dined. They were doing serious business that was so serious and so momentous, they didn't want to do it at the White House because the White House doesn't have the amenities, as fantastic as it is. 55,000 square feet, 5 levels, 2 levels below ground, its own bunker, impenetrable bunker, a private residence on top, personal chefs, an enormous kitchen. But it still was no match for what he was going to work out with Shinzo Abe. They had to go to Mar-a-Lago. And so that's what they did. Quite simply, they went, they dealt, and what happened? Well, we looked and we've seen so far, have we seen any rockets flying up, any missile tests from North Korea? It's not an accident that Kim Jong-un fired his last missile over the northern part of Japan because Beijing told him to, but we haven't seen any of them since then. So President Trump cut off the duplicitous Beijing influence over North Korea by engaging directly with Kim Jong-un, which everyone said, you're legitimizing a dictator. No, he was reorienting the relationship so that Beijing could no longer be the puppet master for Kim Jong-un. The open exchange and dialogue has removed much of the ability of Beijing to leverage that little dictatorship as a nuclear threat for their own economic benefit. The dialogue was as much, if not more, about dismantling Beijing's geopolitical influence as it was about denuclearizing the Korean peninsula, but no one caught that part of the strategy. We discussed it a little bit here, but for the most part in media, Americans are completely oblivious to the fact that besides not having the missile tests going on, and besides having at least some semblance of denuclearization, even if it's not real, the point is that he's no longer launching rockets over Japan and a show of threat towards the United States because he was told to by Beijing. President Trump has outmaneuvered Chairman Jinping in North Korea and Chairman Kim Jong-un. He stood guard on the watchtower, and now there's mutual fellowship between the leaders of North Korea and South Korea. And now you understand why we have an invasionary horde coming. We'll be back with your calls after this.
does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
Have you ever been jealous of someone? Maybe your coworker got the position you felt you deserved, along with the raise. Maybe your neighbor invited you over to see the new luxury car, or maybe your roommate got the newest iPad and keeps showing off all the cool apps. Here's the thing. Jealous people obsess about the object of jealousy, believing that if they get what someone else has, then they'll be fulfilled. Instead of building others up, jealousy wants to destroy them. The moment jealous thoughts run through your mind, ask God to take them away. Never let jealousy take hold. It always leaves a bitter taste in your mouth.
Tony Dungy, author of the popular Uncommon book series. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
Equipped with Chris Brooks.
This program is an apologetic endeavor. What I want to do is really train you in the art and science of defending and commending your Christian faith to people who maybe they've been hurt by the church, maybe they don't believe like you believe, and you're saying to yourself, how do I have an effective conversation with them? Well, we're looking for an evangelistic edge, if you will, that will allow us to more effectively, more contextualize the gospel so that we can reach men and women for Christ. Quite often, the on-ramp, if you will, is looking at culture and taking advantage of the conversations that folks are already having and saying, how can I leverage this to get people to talk about Jesus? This show becomes kind of massively significant to you if your desire is to reach people for Christ.
Get equipped with Chris Brooks.
Join me Monday through Friday at noon Central Time on Urban Family Talk.
From America's election headquarters.
President Obama visited a state he won twice to rally support for Democratic candidates, including Nevada Senate candidate Congresswoman Jackie Rosen.
If Republicans keep Congress this fall, you better believe they are coming after health care again. And millions of people across the country who count on this are not going to have it. Even Republicans, they just don't know it.
Republican Senator Dean Heller thinks Rosen's special guest will miss the mark.
Nevada was wiped out under the Obama administration. We had 60% of our homes. 60% of the homes were underwater here in the state.
2 years into his first term, with the 2010 elections approaching, President Obama had a 45% approval rating, and Democrats lost the House. 2 years into President Trump's first term, with the 2018 elections approaching, his approval rating is 2 points higher, 47%, and he's trying to use it to help Heller. In Las Vegas, Nevada, Peter Ducey, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Criminals is everywhere, okay? It's criminals in here. I mean, it is, but it's not that many. I mean, it's good people in here trying to get through Mexico and then get to the United States, but that doesn't mean that everybody's a criminal.
Oh, okay. So how can we figure it out? Oh, how can we figure out which is which? Why is it our job to figure it out? Why don't y'all just not try to invade our country? They're being paid to. Yeah, they're being paid to. So, all right. It's not that I don't have a heart of compassion for people who are in dire circumstances, but we already have so many people in this country. And remember, we're like infidels when we don't care for those within our own house. We have enough of our homeless population in this country, which is comprised, almost 40% of the homeless people in this country are veterans. The majority of the rest of that 60% are people who are suffering from mental illness, and they don't have anywhere to go because we've dismantled our mental health care apparatus for these people. And so $135 billion would go a long way to building those tiny home communities that veterans prefer when they're coming back from abroad, where they've been literally living outside and in these tin can vehicles, and they just can't handle with the PTSD and everything else that they have going on, their health challenges. And it's just like being inside of a tin can for 2 years or 18 months. And then they come back to the United States and it's sensory overload and just it's indescribable how much we are here in this country, how much there is to take in and to do and to be. It's too much for people coming back from that environment. Some of these people have been just rotated in and out of the operational theater. They're just hollowed out. They have PTSD. They've been on multiple tours to Afghanistan they've been in the Middle East. They come back to the United States, so we're all air conditioned out. We're driving our little cars that can talk, and everything here is just so much too much. And so what they have found to be very successful is where they build these little tiny home communities, and you and I would never be able to handle it. But it's a house that's the size of a glorified shed. It's not even as big as a single width mobile home. And it's a community of these little homes that they build. And so, again, building a shed with running water and electricity and heating and cooling, these little things cost less than $30,000 to build. And so they'll take a 2-acre lot in the city where they've taken down a bunch of homes, and they'll put a bunch of these houses up, and there's grass, and there's a little porch out front where you can have a chair, and there's outdoor lighting, and there's pathways that you can walk over to the main building. And in the main building, there's full-sized amenities. And sometimes they even have the full-size showers and everything there. And all you have in your little mobile home is you just have, in your shed-sized home, your tiny home, you'll have, a kitchen sink and a cook plate, and you'll have some storage in a refrigerator and a microwave, and you'll have a bathroom where you can take a quick shower. But as far as like a full-blown, facilities, and there'll be workout area and library, and there'll be a computer room and all that, and that's in the main facility. And what they found is this environment works even better than when you build a veteran's home, quote unquote, where they're living almost in a dormitory situation. Because the little tiny home environment means, unlike in a dorm where you're in an open bay and there are beds, kind of like basic training, or unlike an apartment situation where you have your apartment or your room, but you have to share the bathroom in a communal area and you only have a door to shut. These tiny sheds mean you can be self-contained in the tiny shed. It has windows on 3 sides. You can open your curtains, open your window. You can play a little music. You can have that privacy and the self-contained unit of it, but it's not so big that it's overwhelming for you to take care of. There's not so much sensory overload that your PTSD is triggered. Meanwhile, in the main building, they have the counseling services, and you can go in there and you can access your therapist and your counselor. You can access the library. And if you need to go somewhere, they have a shuttle that can take you, to go get things. And you might be thinking, well, why do they need that? Because we've sent them to war. Remember, when you join the military, you become an asset. And you submit yourself to being deployed over and over and over again and utilized as an asset until the military no longer needs you for use. And then if you decide to separate, well, that's on you. And while we do have a Veterans Administration, it doesn't do the best job of caring for these veterans who are coming from the Middle East and suffering from PTSD. And so it is up to us to take care of them first. They've already poured out their blood, sweat, and tears, and some of them their limbs they've left over there. And then when they get back here, they're faced with the overwhelming prospect of dealing with American culture and no help for their PTSD. And we've got 32 of them a day committing suicide, and the ones that don't kill themselves are homeless. What do we do for them? No offense to those who are in countries that, quite honestly, they're horrible, but you are not an American citizen. And so if I get to decide where my tax dollars go, I would say send those tax dollars to these veterans. Use the tax dollars to build outpatient and inpatient treatment facilities for these mentally ill people. Some of them are just plain old mentally ill, and they need to be housed in a facility where they can't hurt themselves or other people. But some of them need counseling and medication and therapy, and with those types of things, they can go on to be productive citizens. Instead of having San Francisco be the public defecation capital of America, how about if we take those homeless people and spend our tax dollars on them? If we know what works and we don't do it, how much worse can it be? Where's the condemnation for that? It is our duty to care for them. Remember when Ann Coulter came on and we talked about the actual people group that is America, and how Ann Coulter and I are more closely related through our shared history, because her family has been here as long as my family has been in this country, that we share some of the same DNA and blood because of slavery and the history of these two people groups living in this place together. Elizabeth Warren taught us the lesson last week that all white women in America, and the men as well, have at least a minimum 1.8% Native American blood. I have more than that. So we share that. Also, I have some white lineage. Share that with Ann Coulter. I don't know what her background is, if she has any black lineage in hers, but she could very well. Most black Americans have up to 25% of their genetic makeup contributed by whites. We are one people. And when I say it is our responsibility to take care of those who are in this country with us before we take care of people who are not, it is a biblical obligation. It upsets me that we have so many people who don't seem to understand that. They just can't seem to get their minds wrapped around it, or they won't because they don't want to. They're like the people I described yesterday on the show who have this pathological, it's like some kind of sickness. It's a compulsion, a pathological compulsion to help people outside of their family instead of taking care of their own. So I mentioned this story. I want to get to it today before we close out the show. Broadcast TV hits a record percentage of LGBTQ regulars, study finds. Broadcast television is enlisting a record percentage of LGBT, etc. characters, featuring more of those characters of color than those that are white for the first time in the 2018-19 season. GLAAD's annual Where We Are on TV report was released on Thursday and found that these characters comprise 8.8% of all regular characters this season, up 2.4% from 2017-2018. Last season had previously held the record for the most in the report's 23-year history. Among those characters, 22% were black, 8% were Latin, and 8% were Asian Pacific Islander, which represents a historical high for black characters and a tie with last year's findings on Latin characters. LGBT broadcast characters have additionally reached gender parity among women and men. Both account for 49% of characters. Last year, men were in the clear majority, making 55% of the characters, with women being 44%. Overall, LGBT regular and recurring characters on broadcast are posting a 31% increase from the 2017-18 season. Meanwhile, on primetime cable shows, the report found that these characters have increased 20% from 173 to 208 characters. On Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, the streaming platforms monitored by GLAAD, these characters have increased 72% from the previous year, jumping from 65 characters to 112. Now, they did this survey of regular and recurring characters across broadcast, cable, and major streaming platforms from June 1 of 2018 to May 31 for 2019, so all the programming that covers that time frame. And they claim that the reason why they're doing that is because shows like Will and Grace, Supergirl, Empire, and How to Get Away with Murder all attract millions of viewers weekly and show that audiences are clearly hungry for new stories and perspectives. Now, I know for the one program that we have watched over and over again that has two characters on it, they're not prominently featured, and we don't watch it for those characters. We were watching it for the storyline of the other characters, and we watched the show from before they introduced the same-sex characters. Since the last season, we've been talking as a family about whether or not we should continue to watch it, because we're certain that this fall, when it returns, they will increase the visibility of the same-sex characters and decrease the visibility of heterosexual characters on the show. And, of course, this survey kind of supports that. And I guess it's just like you can't get away from it. It seems like it's everywhere. Now, it's sin, and as Christians, we hate the sin, not the sinner, and we're called to, pray for those who are suffering from these things. But we also have to be careful that we're not supporting the agenda through our viewership, and that's the hard part. If you get to liking a show and then they introduce a same-sex couple, it puts you in a position where you have to try to figure out what you're going to do. I wanted to also go over George Soros inserting himself into the the Missouri elections process. Now, we did discuss an issue earlier with the National Shooting Sports Foundation issuing the warning about the banning of ammo. Here we have this story about progressive media donor George Soros bigfooting into Missouri ballot fight over redistricting and ethics. Now, the redistricting fight here on the ballot it's a no-go. If you're a Missourian, you're voting no on that, because what they would do is they would take the state of Missouri, which is roughly a square with a little boot on the bottom, and they would draw the districting lines in vertical fashion up from the top of the state down to the bottom, squiggling and dodging and moving to catch all of the minority voters that they could, to ensure that rural voters who currently now get to vote the way they want to would be lumped in with minority voters who tend to vote Democrat, thereby changing Missouri from a solidly red state to a solidly blue one for the foreseeable future. So that's a no. But how do you know also that I'm right about this? Well, national progressive activist George Soros, as the billionaire boogeyman of conservative nightmares, has dumped $250,000 into Missouri ethics reform campaign this month. The Open Society Policy Center, a part of Soros's philanthropic network, actually donated $300,000 on January 9th to the Move Ballot Fund. And what they want to do with that is, he also gave $300,000 or $250,000 to another group called Clean Missouri. They want to get an ethics initiative on the November ballot. Now, Clean Missouri is nothing but a backdoor control mechanism to get Agenda 21 into the state of Missouri. Missouri voters have been rejecting this for the past maybe 20 years. They've been trying to get this in here, and every way but loose they put it in, we always beat it down. So George Soros really wants to see it, because it's annoying to him that the center of the country, we were a bellwether state, meaning whoever we voted for the president was the president. And we missed it when we went for Romney and Obama won. But I still think, missing one contest shouldn't take away our bellwether status. And this money, these two initiatives are two ways to take away the voter integrity of the state of Missouri, where we can vote for a largely Republican legislature, and we had a Democrat for the governor for 16 years. We've had divided government many times in the past, but right now we have a supermajority in the legislature for Republicans, and we have tons and tons and tons of Republicans all over, up and down the ballot, who rode the Trump coattails into victory. And so one of the things that I think is going on here is Soros wants his hands on Missouri. It's a plum state, good population, less than 6 million, but still good. And he wants to get a hand on it so that he can then kind of infiltrate his way into other states. We're in his sightlines. Research the information. You're voting no on the Clean Missouri deal, and you're voting no on Amendment 2. And you know what? I'm going to give you the voter guide. I'll post it on Facebook. I have one for you from a trusted source, a voter guide for Missouri voters that you can take a look at, that has all of these ballots in order that you can print out and take with you to the polls. All right. That's the show. God bless you. Thank you so much for fantastic calls and interaction. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Good night from the Heartland.